I now declare this 25th meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts in order. Colleagues, we have bells ringing, and we've agreed that I'm going to just mention a couple of small pieces of business. Then we'll move immediately to Mr. Ferguson's presentation. We'll have the presentation from the Auditor General. I will suspend the meeting. We'll return to the House. When we've concluded our voting, we will return back here and begin with our questioning in the usual rotation. Everybody in agreement? All right. So the only thing I want to announce is, colleagues, you'll recall that Chapter 8, we were rescheduling that from it having been postponed, and the choice next week was Monday, Wednesday. Ends up Wednesday's the best day for all the parties. So Wednesday we will be doing a hearing, a public hearing on Chapter 8, Disaster Relief for Producers, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, of the Spring 2013 AG report. And as I said, on Monday, May the 12th, we will do committee business. We have a number of things outstanding. And the last thing I'll mention to you is the invitation for the annual conference of public accounts committees, the national conference. It's in St. John's, Newfoundland this year. The invitation is being sent around to you. And I've asked Joanne to just take a look at a draft budget and any other prep material and have it ready for our Monday business meeting so we can make some decisions on what we want to do on that. So, colleagues, if we're good there, Mr. Ferguson, I'll ask you to read your presentation of the report, and then, as I say, we will suspend, return, and continue after that. Sir, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Monsieur le Président, j'ai le plaisir de vous...
Mr. Chair, I am pleased to present my Spring 2014 report, which was tabled in the House of Commons yesterday. I am accompanied by Assistant Auditors General Jerome Bertholet and Wendy Loschuk and Audit Principal John Affleck. This report touches on a number of different areas which illustrate how important it is for government to consider both the short and long-term perspectives when planning programs. Serving immediate needs can move the emphasis away from long-term planning, and that can impact results down the road. In the first audit, we looked at how the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, the RCMP, National Defence, and Finance Canada have carried out key responsibilities to manage the federal government's pension plans for public servants. The federal government's net liability relating to these pension plans exceeds $150 billion. Although we found that the entities we audited have carried out their responsibilities under the law, no one is responsible for carrying out a regular and systematic assessment of whether Government of Canada pension plans are sustainable over the long term.
Now, in an environment where interest rates are low and plan members are living longer, it is therefore important that public sector pension plans be designed and managed in a way that considers not just present circumstances, but also protects the interests of current and future employees and taxpayers. We also looked at how Correctional Service Canada planned and executed the expansion of its correctional facilities to accommodate offenders. The agency is adding over 2,700 cells to 37 facilities. It expects that when it completes this work in 2015, overcrowding in federal prisons will largely be eased. We found that the Correctional Service met its immediate needs, but it did not consider the impact of expansions on supporting infrastructure. It also did not consider how to address regional pressures and the long-term needs of the offender population. Decisions about expansions were based on where land was available and where construction could be completed quickly. For example, we found that 8 of 20 institutions that were initially identified for closure were instead expanded. The agency has committed to developing a long-term accommodation plan by 2015 to guide modernization. Let's turn our attention to the First Nations Policing Program. This program was created in 1991 to address concerns about policing in First Nations communities. The program is not working as intended and many issues persist. For example, though intended to provide First Nations communities with policing services other than those that are the responsibility of the provinces, we found that the program is sometimes used to replace core services normally provided by the provinces. We also noted that in Ontario, the program does not ensure that policing services on First Nations reserves meet the standards that apply to policing services elsewhere in the province. This report also presents our findings about the procurement process used to award the 2009 contract for the government's integrated relocation program. We found that a lack of upfront planning within Public Works and Government Services Canada, National Defence, the RCMP, and the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat led to missed milestones. This affected decisions the organizations had to make and actions they took along the way. While officials took steps to remove some barriers to competition, these steps were not sufficient. As a result, the relocation services contract process did not facilitate access and encourage competition, and only one bid was received. Étant donné la complexité du contrat,
Given the complexity of the relocation program contract and its significance, this type of procurement requires considerable oversight and input from senior officials. Public Works and Government Services Canada should work with client organizations to manage the procurement of relocation services so that there is sufficient oversight and accountability. Let's turn now to our audit of how Public Works and Government Services Canada monitors specific terms and conditions outlined in the contracts with a third-party provider of building management services. We found that monitoring steps are adequately designed, but noted weaknesses in the way they are implemented. For example, Public Works did not apply its quality monitoring program, a key contract monitoring step, to over 230 leased buildings, representing 8% of the total space managed under contracts. Such weaknesses reduced the department's assurance that the service provider complied with the contracts. In our audit of aggressive tax planning, we found that the Canada Revenue Agency has an adequate program to detect, correct, and deter non-compliance of certain tax schemes. However, the agency has to continue its work to improve the management of information, to run the aggressive tax planning program, and to measure its success.
Looked at how the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency manages and delivers selected transfer payment programs. We found that the agency is not adequately monitoring the contributions it pays out. It does not collect enough information from recipients to know the extent to which they are complying with the requirements set out in their contribution agreements. As a result, the agency does not know the extent to which programs are achieving their intended objectives, nor whether the funding it provides is making a difference to economic development in the North. Quand l'agence a été fondée en 2009,
when the agency was established in 2009, the government determined that its headquarters would be located in Iqaluit. However, the agency has not been able to fill some key positions in the North, and critical corporate functions continue to reside in the Ottawa Liaison Office. The agency is updating its human resources plan to guide future recruitment, but it does not have a plan to relocate corporate functions to Iqaluit. Moving on to our audit of Statistics Canada, we found that the agency applied its framework to ensure the quality of its data products. As Canada's national statistical agency, Statistics Canada generates key information on the country's socio-economic conditions. This information is used by governments, as well as by researchers, academics, businesses, and non-governmental organizations. We found that Statistics Canada needs to better understand and address the needs of users who come from outside the federal government. In particular, Statistics Canada needs to better meet the need for data on small geographic areas and subpopulations. In 2013, our office performed special examinations of the Laurentian Pilotage Authority and the Canadian Museum of Civilization Corporation. Neither examination noted any significant deficiencies, though we did recommend some improvements to both organizations' practices. As in past years, our spring report includes the main points of the reports we presented to the boards of these Crown corporations.
Government can become caught in a cycle of reacting to pressures, whether to mitigate capacity concerns in prisons or meet program timelines. Though government should work to provide Canadians with programs and services in a timely fashion, planning should also look beyond the needs of the day. Better long-term planning is achievable in many of the areas we are reporting on today and would improve results for Canadians and make better use of taxpayer dollars. Mr. Chair, that concludes my opening statement. Nous serions heureux de répondre à vos questions. Merci.
We are happy to answer any questions members may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson. And as agreed, colleagues, I will now suspend, and if we could return immediately after the vote, and we'll begin our rotation, questions and comments. We now stand suspended. Thank you. The 25th meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts is now back in order. We have heard from Mr. Ferguson, who has formally presented his report to us, and it is now my intention to turn us to our regular rotation, unless there are any interventions prior to starting that.
Yes, Chair. I move that the committee continue its work until 6 o'clock this evening in order to receive Mr. Ferguson with the respect that is owed to him, and so that we be able to ask all the questions to him and that he'd be able to give his answers.
Mr. Ferguson is available, and his staff. Are you, sir?
Certainly, yes.
Okay. So, motions before us.
Mr. Chair, we just had a very slow vote, and we're here. Why don't we see where we get first as a committee, and we can always have these kinds of motions. So maybe Mr. Giguère could wait till after we've actually done our full round and see if there's more time is necessary.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Giguère?
Well, that means we'd be twice delaying the same discussion, but if that's the sine qua non condition to have approval, then I consent.
At the end of the first round, assuming we get to we'll see where we're at the end of the first round, or 5:30, whichever comes first, and then we'll see where we are. Okay? All right, agreed. So, we will begin, and I have a speakers list, and kicking off today's discussion, Mr. Hayes, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome again. I'm going to focus my questions on the Correctional Services Canada, the penitentiary system. And in Section 4.21 of your report, sir, you examined whether Correctional Services Canada had sufficient capacity to ensure safe and secure custody at each security level. Did you audit safety statistics or conduct any review to determine the relationship between capacity and safety? And specifically, did you or are you stating in any way that there is any relationship between double bunking and safety? Because double bunking was mentioned a number of times in your report as well.
The audit didn't specifically touch on that issue. However, we do say in paragraph 19 that in 2009, Correctional Services Canada identified serious implications with double bunking, including increased levels of tension, aggression, and violence. It also identified increased safety and security concerns for staff and offenders. So this was something that in 2009 that CSC identified was a risk that could be associated with double bunking.
That's interesting, because there was a report on CBC in December 2013 that actually refuted that indicated that prison violence is not linked to double bunking. But if in the event we do study this report more fully with officials, then I guess we'll cross that path at the time. Did you have a look at the types of facilities, i.e. in terms of, let me give you an example, Yukon, for example, that's what's referred to as a Generation 3 facility that was built at a cost of $67 million, and it was actually designed for double bunking. And, many argue that double bunking is socially better than being in isolation. So did you make a relationship between the types of facilities? I think we understand double bunking in a cell designed for one person might not be the best, but some facilities are designed specifically for double bunking.
What we were doing was we were looking at how Correctional Services Canada managed the expansion to its facilities. And they have policies about, the level of double bunking that they consider to be acceptable. So we took that into account from the point of view of the system as a whole. But again, the audit wasn't focusing on double bunking and the impact of double bunking.
Your report states that in 2009, Correctional Services Canada received approval to spend $751 million over 5 years to expand existing institutions, and they also received approval in principle to construct 5 new penitentiaries at a cost of $960 million. And you note in 2012 that Correctional Services Canada recognized that its offender population had not grown as much as they expected, and they consequently returned $1.48 billion that was earmarked for construction, which included funding for operations that had been set aside and for growth in the offender population that actually didn't occur. And as a matter of fact, in your report again, Correctional Services Canada projected a growth from 14,200 in 2009 to 18,450 by March 2013. And in fact, in March 2013, the population had increased only to 15,224, which is a dramatic shortage in terms of what was projected. Can you provide any insight as to how officials underestimated this so much, or did officials provide explanation to you as to why they underestimated the prison population so much?
I think, you know, in terms of the specifics of how they did the calculation, that's something that the that Correctional Services themselves would have to explain. However, you know, we do indicate in paragraph 10 that they were estimating the large increase due to changes in sentencing legislation. However, they then determined that, you know, what they were expecting to result from that didn't occur in terms of impacts on their actual population. However, you know, that sort of the details of the calculation would have to come from them.
Were any of your recommendations moving forward based on projected population provided by Correctional Services Canada that in fact may not materialize? Because, you know, over the last 4 years, we're seeing an increase of 250 per year, and I believe I read in your report that there is a projected increase of 1,500 over the course of 2014 to 2015, and are you making recommendations based on that projected 1,500 population increase?
Certainly, you know, we noted that they had overestimated in that original time period. Then they readjusted their estimates, you know, to a different way of estimating. So, you know, yes, we are looking at the fact that they have now new projections going forward. I think in terms of the types of issues that we have raised in terms of having a long-term accommodation plan, you know, whether sort of that target number is reached within 3 or 4 years or whether it's 5 or 6 years wouldn't necessarily change the recommendation, which is fundamentally to have a good long-term accommodation plan that looks at that growth and what types of facilities would be needed.
Okay. No. You're right.
Thank you.
Well expired, actually. Thank you both. And moving over to Mr. Allen. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Auditor General and his team for being here with us today. The issue of the availability of information you raised in 2 different reports, and I think in 2 different ways. Could you walk us through that? I think one was a cabinet confidentiality issue, and the other issue was just didn't get the information. And so could you highlight for us exactly how that worked itself through? You make a request, what happens in that those particular 2 cases?
Well, certainly, and in general, you know, we will set an audit objective. For example, in the chapter about aggressive tax planning, the audit objective was to look at how the Department of Finance manages requests coming from the Canada Revenue Agency to make changes to legislation to deal with certain tax strategies. And so we would have asked the Department of Finance for information about their process. They gave us an explanation of how the process works, but then they didn't give us any information about, you know, that showed how they actually followed the process in the cases we were dealing with. So we would have explained to them exactly what we wanted, the type of evidence that we were looking for, and then they would have gone through, looked at what they had available, assessed it to determine whether it's cabinet confidence. In this case, determined it was cabinet confidence, which meant that we wouldn't get access to it. I think the other case was probably similar. So departments do, you know, there is an agreement that says what type of information we do have access to and don't have access to. Departments go through our requests when we do ask for something that is in, you know, specific types of documents to determine whether it's in cabinet confidence documents. But we don't, there's, you know, once that decision is made, we obviously don't have access to the information.
But my understanding is you have a protocol in place now that so you understand the parameters you're working inside of. So when you're asking for information, you don't actually ask for cabinet documents because you actually know that you're not going to get them. So was this troubling for you in the sense, and for your department in the sense of, did you agree with them wholeheartedly and say, okay, you're absolutely right, but we're not entitled to them, we're not going to do? Or is there a remedy here that you're seeking to try and get a hold of information that you didn't get?
You know, it's, again, what they said was the information we were asking for was contained in cabinet confidence documents. So you're right, we don't ask for, you know, please give us, you know, information that's in cabinet confidence documents. We ask for information that helps us understand whether they did the steps that they said they should do. You know, again, at the end, there's they go through the process, and there's not much else we can do on that front. Now, in this particular case, you know, I guess I did find it a little surprising that all the information that might exist about sort of any analysis or consideration that was put to these requests was all contained in documents that would be considered cabinet confidence. You know, we have started some conversations with the Privy Council office on this, and I think there may be some areas where, you know, our agreement and our protocol needs to be clarified. So I don't think I need at this point to sort of bring the issue forward beyond what we can work through ourselves with the, you know, with the civil servants. So I think we're okay on that front for now. But if it seems to be a problem, certainly we would then consider bringing the issue back.
Let me just jump to, because time runs short on today, the issue of long-term planning. And I noticed in two of the reports, the one on prisons and the other on the pensions, and if I take us back to the front page of your actual opening comments today at the beginning of the meeting, and quote back to you, talking about public sector pension plans, it says, no one is responsible for carrying out a regular and systematic assessment on whether the Government of Canada pension plans are sustainable over the long term, close quote. You also raised the issue, of course, when it came to I think it's Chapter 4 on prisons, when you talked about the issue of they put facilities, they expanded facilities where they had land inside a secure perimeter, but there was no plan about, well, we need them here, we need them there. Is that fairly accurate in your view as to the lack of long-term planning in both of those particular instances?
Certainly in both of those audits, you know, we do raise the fact that there's work done, you know, short-term needs were satisfied, but there needs to be longer-term planning in both of those areas. So I think that issue of long-term planning is illustrated in both of those audits.
Thank you. Time has expired. Over to Mr. Aspin. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome, Mr. Ferguson, and thank you for appearing again. The special examinations of Crown corporations, what the chapter number 9 is what I'm focusing on, and especially with respect to the Canadian Museum of Civilization Corporation. This report notes that the corporation has put a corporate governance framework that meets expectations of best practices. Can you tell us what are some of these best practices, and were any of these introduced since the last audit in '06?
You know, I don't have certainly the specifics of all of the details of you know, the corporate governance at the museum. You know, we do recognize that the corporation has put in place a framework that meets the expectation of best practices. However, you know, we also said that the board is not fulfilling some of its roles and responsibilities, and some weaknesses related to the board's continuity. So, you know, I don't have sort of the specifics of all of the practices of the good governance. Overall, you know, we found that the corporate governance framework that does exist at the corporation, you know, does meet or is well designed in terms of governance practices. However, there still are some places where the corporation needs to improve and can strengthen the, I guess, the implementation of that framework.
Okay, thank you, sir. And in the consideration of both Crown corporations, you said overall, and could you tell me whether or not this is true? Both corporations said the AG found no significant deficiencies in the authority's systems and places in the case of the Laurentian Pilotage Authority, and as well in the case of the Canadian Museum of Civilization Corporation.
In both of these special examinations, our conclusion was that there were no significant deficiencies in their systems and practices, and we describe, for example, that, you know, a significant deficiency would be reported when there is a major weakness in a corporation's key systems and practices that could prevent it from having reasonable assurance that its assets are safeguarded and controlled, its resources are managed efficiently and economically, and its operations are carried out effectively. So when we're doing a special examination, we are looking for, you know, very specifically described types of weaknesses that could prevent the Crown Corporation from, again, safeguarding its assets and having good practices in place to manage its business. In both of these cases, we found there were no significant deficiencies. We did have some recommendations for improving some of their practices, but our overall conclusion was that there were no significant deficiencies.
Okay, and you've made some good, fairly positive recommendations here, particularly in terms of the Canadian Museum of Civilization, in terms of strategic planning and update their collection of development plans, and also the management and use of the collection information system. Has that corporation agreed with your recommendations? Are they moving forward on implementing these specific improvements?
In terms, actually, of both of these special examinations on the two Crown corporations, each of them has said that they agree with our recommendations and that they will move forward on implementing them.
Okay. And Chair, if I have a few minutes, I'm going to do this.
No, you have 30 seconds.
30 seconds? Good.
Yes.
I'm going to do this a little backwards. I'd like to compliment you, sir, on your French. I'm amazed at how you've learned the language. As one that's tried to acquire the language all my life, I'm very envious of your talent.
I appreciate that. I still have a lot of work to do, though.
Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Very welcome. Okay, moving on. Monsieur Giguère, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Ferguson and all of his team to the committee. You do extremely important work pointing out problems in the administration, government issues governance issues rather throughout the government, and you suggest solutions. The people that I represent, like many Canadians, pay all their taxes. And it's important that that money be spent with diligence, intelligence, and without waste. Your report, in the 9 chapters that you highlight, your report highlights some major problems, some major management problems within this government. And it's quite troubling. I'll remind you of something that needs to be highlighted. That's in Chapter 2, the procurement of relocation services. This is the service for the relocation of employees of the government, in particular members of the CF, with the goal being that the costs be as reasonable as possible for the state. The government spends about $300 million a year on this project, and in 2006 you presented a report on this problem, and you concluded in 2006 that the contracts were not attributed in a fair and equal manner, and that was in 2006. And the Public Accounts Committee at the time supported your conclusions, and the recommendations were accepted by this government. Recommendations that required that contracts be a part of a fair, competitive process, and that it also be permit the government to save money. Now you've come back in 2014 with another report on this same program, managed by the same department, and your conclusion once again is that the measures undertaken to increase competitiveness in the attribution of the contracts were insufficient. There's still only one service provider. So in 8 years, this major problem has not been fixed, Mr. Chair. And taxpayers who are listening and who pay their taxes, how do you explain that despite all of your recommendations made in the past, that governments, be they liberal or conservative, have not done what it takes? There's still no competition in this area. And now we'd like to have something with a little bit stronger. How can this government finally fix this problem? Because, hey, 8 years to fix a problem, that's a long time.
Recommendations in this report, and I think one of the reasons that we certainly wanted to get this audit completed was so that if we did identify any weaknesses that existed in the process, that it could help to inform the process for the next contract in this area. You know, certainly if we compare the process that was used in 2004 to the process used for the 2009 contract, the processes were different. You know, and I would say that the process to award the 2009 contract was better than the process for the 2004 contract. But we did find that, you know, that the departments got behind schedule, and by getting behind schedule, it meant they had to shorten some time frames. They took some decisions, for example, of issuing only one contract and not dividing it up into 3 contracts. And all of those decisions led to there being only one bidder, and that bidder being the sort of the incumbent service provider at that time. I think the other thing, though, that was concerning for us was even after it became evident that there would only be one bidder, Public Works decided to apply its processes to examine the cost, to examine the price that was bid. You know, and they got some information that indicated there might be some cost components that shouldn't be allowed. They stopped that work and didn't adjust the pricing in the contract. So I think sort of the concern with us, we saw the decision points along the way. We understood, you know, that they made those decisions, made them within the framework. Those decisions then led to there being only one bidder. But even after it led to one bidder, they didn't apply the processes that they had available to them to examine the price that was bid in a one-bidder situation.
Sorry, time has expired. Moving on. Mr. Woodworth, you have the floor, sir.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Mr. Ferguson and Mr. Berthollet, Ms. Lovchuk, and Mr. Affleck. I would also like to congratulate you for your mastery of the French language. You are speaking very well, and you speak better than I think I speak in English.
Clearly, my French is not so good. I'm going to ask you about Chapter 8, and I'm going to begin with the observations and recommendations beginning at paragraph 8.10, and I'm going to ask you some questions about the quality assurance framework and quality guidelines. First of all, I understand that those do include good measures which ensure accuracy of the data that Statistics Canada collects. Is that correct?
Statistics Canada does have a quality assurance framework that includes 6 elements as we define in paragraph 10: accuracy, timeliness, accessibility, coherence, relevance, and interpretability.
My question was that the measures which that framework includes to ensure accuracy are reliable measures, and I'll ask secondarily to that. I understand they have also been regularly employed by Statistics Canada to ensure accuracy.
And again, yes, the quality assurance framework includes these 6 key elements, which are important elements of quality, and they do apply that framework to the products that they produce. So, and we did find that Statistics Canada is applying its quality framework to what it is releasing.
Good. And just to be completely clear, in addition to accuracy, that quality framework also results in Statistics Canada meeting satisfactory timelines for its data collection and release. Is that correct?
Timeliness is the second of their 6 elements of quality, yes.
They're meeting that?
And they were meeting it. I think we had one example where what they do is they say, this is the date we are going to release something, and we only found one case where they didn't hit that projected date, and that was missed by only a 4-week period.
Very good. And I understand another quality in those guidelines is to ensure that data is accessible and that the guidelines define what's necessary to ensure that data is accessible to Canadians, and that Statistics Canada is also meeting those requirements. Is that correct? We did say that Statistics Canada has made data from the selected data products accessible to users. We did, though, also point out that some of their users have said things like the website is hard to navigate, so there are some places for improvement. Understood that, in fact, the Internet dissemination and website dissemination of data is a new initiative that Statistics Canada is proposing as an improvement to its accessibility. Is that correct?
Certainly, they did indicate that they were planning on making some further improvements to make the products more accessible.
And also, the quality guidelines require Statistics Canada to assess and ensure the coherence of its product, that is, to bring them together in a framework with consistency, and Statistics Canada is satisfactorily doing that, correct?
Again, we do say that they have assessed the coherence of the selected data products. So, for example, they, routinely compare data from multiple sources and apply methods to ensure the coherence. We also pointed out that, because they had concerns about comparability of certain information related to the National Household Survey, that they cautioned their users about that. So when they have, so they make sure that their users understand the coherence of the data.
Very good. And I do want to move on then to the National Household Survey and just clarify a few points about that. I understand that the National Household Survey resulted in data, but that there was data unavailable for 3% of the population. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Sorry, we're now out of time, sir. So, moving on. Madame Jones, you now have the floor, ma'am.
Oh, thank you. Actually, I'm going to pick up exactly where my colleague left off on Chapter 8, Section 8.52. And you did highlight that due to changes in census collection, from mandatory to voluntary, that the response rate had decreased from 94% to 69%, which would be a drop of about 25%. You also pointed out that it had caused data to be more unreliable, and as a result of quality issues with the data collected, that 25% of geographic areas do not have reliable national household survey data available for use. So in my opinion, when I read this report, it clearly states to me that there were flaws in moving from a mandatory data collection for vital information to a voluntary system. And I'd like to ask why you would not have recommended that we go back to a mandatory data collection system, and because to me it seems like that would be the simple answer to fixing a lot of these problems that were outlined in your report.
We do not comment on government policy. So what we looked at here was there was a policy. Statistics Canada had to implement that policy. We looked at how they managed that. At the end of the process, there was data about 3% of the population they were not able to release, compared to 1% under the census approach. Their users have been asking for data, so we said they need to better understand what their users are asking for and try and determine how they can fill that gap. So we're not going to recommend any particular policy approach to filling those types of weaknesses or that we've identified. It's up to then the department or the agency to determine what types of policy tools to recommend to help them deal with those problems, if any policy tools are required.
Okay, thank you. And it certainly establishes that there is some room to make some improvement, and there are definitely weaknesses. My other question again comes from Chapter 8, and it deals directly with Section 8.48, and it deals with the labor market data. You indicated in your report that there was a panel report from 2009 that highlighted the issues with better local data on job vacancies by occupation and location. You also noted that the government had still not fully addressed the shortfall in the 5 years since the report was made public. So I guess because of that, you also went on to say that it's still not possible to determine where in a province or territory job vacancies are located. So I guess my question is, what impact do you think this would have on government's labor market opinions for specific regions if they don't have local job data to start with in the first place? And we're dealing with an issue in the country right now with regard to temporary foreign workers, and it's all coming back to data and what labor market information that we would have available to us to be able to make the best decisions. So I guess I'm looking at what you've indicated in this report. Very glaringly, it's telling me that we have a huge gap here, and I guess I'd like to know how it impacts up on other programs that we're currently funding inside the federal government.
What we did identify was that there was a panel report in 2009 that noted the need for local data on job vacancies. In 2011, Statistics Canada did begin to produce, they added 2 questions to their survey on employment payrolls and hours to try and collect some data related to job vacancies. But it still wasn't enough for them to produce information at sort of a more local level about where job vacancies are located. So again, it's something that users of Statistics Canada have been asking for, and what we have recommended is that they need to do increase the amount of consultation they have with their users and determine if there are, I guess, feasible ways for them to fill the needs, and one of those needs would be information about local job vacancies.
If I could just move very quickly to
Very
another
quickly,
question. And it's already been raised as well. It's to do with comments that were made in Chapter 1 and Chapter 3 with regard to not being able to access information that you were looking for. It's quite obvious, because you did not have the information, that you were not able to make appropriate conclusions with regard to those particular sections. So I guess my question comes, is there a process by which government, you know, they say that this is cabinet protected because of cabinet privacy issues or whatever the case may be. Is there a way around that in terms of your office? You have a huge responsibility to Canadians, that when you look at how monies are being spent inside the government, to be able to do appropriate audits and make appropriate recommendations as to whether it's being done properly. However, without information, that's very difficult. So is there a way to obtain information that could be deemed cabinet secrecy by departments, but not necessarily deemed cabinet secrecy through another avenue or form? And I guess I would be referring to the court system.
I mean, certainly in this particular instance, I don't feel we need to resort to any sort of outside source at this point. I think that we will, you know, again, explore the issue and try and resolve the issue sort of at the bureaucratic level before we resort to other, you know, other avenues for resolving the issue.
Okay, time's expired. Thank you both very much. And over to Mr. Albus. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank the Auditor General for being here with your staff. In regard to Chapter 3, aggressive tax planning, you've concluded overall that the Canada Revenue Agency's aggressive tax planning program has tools to detect, correct, and debtor non-compliance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You've also concluded that the Canada Revenue Agency has established a training plan for aggressive tax planning auditors and has put in place performance measures to evaluate the aggressive tax planning program results. Is that also correct?
We did in terms of the training. However, we said that they need to do a better job of making sure they know whether the auditors are following all of the training. In terms of the measures, we identified that they have had some measures. Of course, this is difficult. It's difficult to measure success in something where you were trying to deter behavior, but we feel that they could improve on some of their performance measures.
So on the subject of detection, in your report you've noted the Canada Revenue Agency has not fully evaluated whether it's able to detect high-risk large business files, as you said. You've actually recommended that in order for the agency to obtain assurance that its aggressive tax planning risk assessment tool properly identifies high-risk files, that it should complete the testing of what's known as the National Risk Assessment Model and its effectiveness. Could you please inform us of what the agency has said in response to this recommendation?
The agency has agreed with the recommendation. They say that they are committed to testing the effectiveness of the risk assessment tool. So they have agreed that it is something that they need to sort of back test and make sure that it is effective.
So to confirm, Canada Revenue Agency has agreed to your recommendation on the National Risk Assessment Model and has agreed to have it evaluated, and it's in this fiscal year. Is that correct?
It says that the ongoing evaluation will commence, it will accomplish through the built-in feedback provided as part of the automation project. So the project is to be completed in the 2014-15 year, and we would expect that that this process would be built into that model.
Now, there's been some discussion. You've raised that you were unable to conclude whether the Department of Finance had followed its processes to provide timely analysis of legislative issues regarding aggressive tax planning. Yet in your concluding paragraph, and I'll go to the paragraph question 3.61, you say quite clearly that, and I quote, although it is apparent that most of the agency's priority requests from 2011 to 2013 have been addressed in recent budgets. Is that correct?
That's correct. In terms of the particular items that we were looking at, we did see that most of them were dealt with in budgets. However, what we were looking for was to determine how the Department of Finance actually processed the requests, So while we saw what was going into the system and the fact that there were budget changes, we weren't able to look at the actual steps that finance took to see whether they did comply with all of their normal steps and were taken in a timely fashion.
So in paragraph 3.58, it says that you were provided with a description of the process used for legislative changes, a template used in budget briefings, and information about budget measures announced by the department and some analysis. So they were compliant in giving you what they could, or at least what they felt they could, that did not meet the cabinet confidentiality. Is that correct?
It's my understanding that they assessed what we were asking for and gave us, yes, they gave us things like the description of the process that they felt they could give us, and then determined that the rest of the information constituted a cabinet confidence.
Okay. And I also note that there is a very helpful chart, at least helpful for people like myself, Exhibit 3.1, which points out a number of things: offshore insurance, RRSP strips, stock dividend value shift, and tech recs. Now, rather than going into all of those, I just wanted to point out that also you had a subsequent event, 3.62, I guess, that after your audit was concluded, Auditor General, that there was some further legislative action showing that the government does obviously pay very close attention to what Canada Revenue Agency, what they feel are legislative priorities, and obviously took those seriously.
Well, they did in the federal budget of February 2014 propose changes to address the offshore insurance plan issue. So again, that was another situation where we did see that there eventually were legislative changes to deal with issues that Revenue Canada had brought forward.
Okay, sorry, Dan. Yep, time's gone by. Moving along, Mr. Allen, you have the floor again, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Back to Chapter 8, and specifically to 850, where you talk about data on job vacancies from surveys that you term has limitations. In the paragraph itself, you actually you said, for example, reported job vacancies in Alberta, and I know my colleagues who live in Alberta always tell us about the great number of jobs that are out there, and there's no doubt it's true. My son actually works there, so there's no question that there's jobs in Alberta. The dilemma for folks in Welland, for instance, who might be thinking of going there, according to what I read here, and Mr. Ferguson, I asked you to help me with this. It says that if you looked at this particular survey, you wouldn't know where the job vacancy is in Alberta. It could be in Medicine Hat or Fort McMurray or Grand Prairie. Well, I used to live in Edmonton at one point in my life too, and that's there at one end of the province to the other end of the province, with one in the middle. And you also go on to the end, and because it talks about limited classification types of work and et cetera, et cetera. So really, at the end of the day, you could pick the right place. You could pick Grand Prairie by accident because you thought, well, it doesn't really tell me where to go, but I'll go to Grand Prairie, get to the employer, and find out that, well, sorry, you're an electrician, Mr. Allen, we wanted a pipe fitter. And so I had to travel to Alberta for a job that doesn't exist because the survey actually couldn't help me get there. It just simply told me there were jobs available. Am I reading that incorrectly, or is that, I realize I paraphrased some of this, and it's somewhat specific, non-specific, if you will, but is that really what the survey told me? There's jobs in Alberta, just can't tell you where, can't tell you actually what the jobs are. Is that really what the survey tells me?
Well, I think sort of the user of this type of data would be, sort of more of a researcher, an analyst, that type of thing, trying to identify, where there might be vacancies, perhaps at the municipal level, that sort of thing. But certainly, we did identify, that the survey really, the information really still is limited to job vacancies at the national, provincial, territorial level, and not at the local level. So anybody who is trying to do research about where there might be job vacancies, sort of from a policy point of view, or understanding, the economics of a particular situation, wouldn't know where those job vacancies existed.
And I appreciate the clarification. It's kind of at a macro policy level, but ultimately, if the government is actually using that as a policy tool to encourage people to go somewhere, they really can't tell you where to go except to go to Alberta, it would seem to me. And I'm not asking you to comment on that, but that's a conjecture that I'm making. But I think actually that's really what I just heard is that, you know, this is stuff that I wouldn't necessarily use personally to go look for a job, but if the policy folks are writing this saying, oh, by the way, there's availability of jobs in Alberta, that's about all they can tell me. But let me go to 853, 852, because I was interested in that. Especially it talks about when we look at the National Household Survey data, and it talks about 25% of the census subdivisions weren't any good due to quality concerns. And then the additional piece is the data for an additional 686, or 15%, was not released for confidentiality reasons. So my question really, is that a cumulative total, 25 plus 15, or is there a subset in there somewhere inside that 15?
It's a cumulative total. The 686 additional census subdivisions that weren't, where the information wasn't released for confidentiality reasons, were mostly places where there would be a very small population. That's why sort of the confidentiality concern. So in terms of census divisions, it is additive, 25% and 15%. However, in terms of the impact on the total 3% of population for which information was not released, it wouldn't have moved that 3% very much at all, because these are very sparsely populated areas.
And I appreciate that. Statistically, that, you know, wouldn't have moved the number of 3, which was, you know, just to make a note, is 3 times higher than when we used to have the long-form census, which is a pretty extreme magnitude, quite frankly. We're not talking about a doubling or a half. We're talking about 3 times as many. So it was 1% in 2006, according to you, when we had a long-form census. It's 3%, which is 3 times the magnitude. That's a pretty high number. But clearly, for small subdivisions, and I used to live in, you know, population subdivisions. I used to live in a small community. Data is important to us, even if we're a small community, when we're trying to make decisions. So even for a reeve in a small place, they still need data. But let me draw us back to the comment that's made in 852, which is that when we had the old census, 94% in 2006 was returned, versus the new one is only 69%. So not only do we get less data, it seems, if I'm reading this correctly, from the new one, we get 3 times higher the amount of data that's unusable to 3% of the population. Is that a fair and accurate description of those 2 paragraphs?
Well, I think I need to clarify that, yes, the response rate went from 94% to 69%. Statistics Canada anticipated that there would be a decrease in the response rate. So what they did was they increased the number of people that they actually surveyed. So the 94% response rate was tied to $3 million surveys, and the 69% rate was tied to 4.5 million surveys. So actually, at the end of the day, the number of responses that were actually received was pretty similar. You know, because when you apply the response rate to the number of surveys sent out, it was actually similar. But what happened was the response rate was not sufficient in certain areas, and therefore they didn't have enough information about 3% of the population. So the issue wasn't so much the number of responses they got back. The issue was more from where those responses came.
Okay. Sorry, time has expired. Thank you. And over to Mr. Woodworth. Pick up where you left off last time, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's quite appropriate because I'll also pick up where Mr. Allen just left off, because you're touching on exactly what I was trying to get to. First of all, the 3% figure for population with unavailable data, that's an increase from 2006, when it was approximately 1%, correct?
That's right.
So even in 2006, there must have been some deficiency in small area and subpopulation data, correct?
Related to 1% of the population at that time.
And again, just to be very clear, you just actually stated this, but I want to be very clear about it. Actually, in 2011, there were responses from about 3 million people across the country, and that was about 200,000 more responses than there was in 2006, correct?
I think if you do the math, 69% of 4.5 million compared to 94% of 3 million, you do get a number that's, that would indicate that there were roughly 200,000 more in 2011.
All right. So those percentages are different because, in fact, the department, or rather Statistics Canada, sent out 50%, or rather the surveys were received by 50% more households in 2011 than in 2006. In other words, by 4.5 million households rather than only 3 million households in 2006, correct?
That's right. And again, that was because they anticipated there would be a change in response rate. They knew they had to increase the number of surveys they actually sent out.
You have not anywhere assessed the cost of what it would take to provide that small area and subpopulation data, correct?
That's correct. I think the only indication of cost in here, other than sort of the overall cost of producing data, was that Statistics Canada did receive additional money to manage the change from the census to the National Household Survey.
But in terms of bridging that 3% gap, there's at least nothing in your report that would tell us how much it would cost to do that, to resource that.
That's correct.
And on the other side of the cost-benefit equation, you also have not assessed what might be the economic value of that 3% subpopulation and small area data to users, correct?
No, that's correct. We haven't.
In fact, your recommendations suggest consulting with the users, and that might be one area where Statistics Canada should consult with the users just to determine the value to them of that data, correct?
Absolutely, to determine what they're looking for, what the value of that is, and then they would need to determine the cost of collecting the data.
And as I understand it, and I don't know if this came from your report, maybe it was the department's response, in November 13, Statistics Canada did in fact initiate a more extensive dialogue with regional and local governments and agencies somewhat along this line. Am I reading that correctly?
That is what the agency has said in their response, so I can't speak to exactly what they have done.
But that, if they do that, that would be an appropriate ongoing further course of action, in your view, would it not?
Well, I think, again, we would have to assess it. We haven't audited it, but what we would be looking for is that they have something that, as you say, would be an ongoing approach to understand the needs of their users across sort of the broad range of those users.
And you would not rule out the possibility that there are alternate sources of data for small area and subpopulations other than the National Household Survey, correct?
Certainly that's something that Statistics Canada would need to explore with their users, given what their users are asking for. Are there other ways to get the information that, on a cost-effective basis, that would fulfill what the users are asking for?
And if this data was for a small area or a specific subpopulation, would it be within policy even to consider generating it and providing it on a cost recovery basis to the users?
I guess I can't speak specifically to sort of all of the cost recovery rules, but it would be certainly, if it's not within the rules now, something that they could explore.
Sorry, time has expired, sir. Thank you both. Over to Madame Jones. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. I have some questions actually with regard to Chapter 6 and the Canor agency. I've been reading, when I was reading through the report, I found it very unusual that there were several sections in which you indicated that they had not, I guess, followed the proper, I don't know if it's proper protocols, but they certainly didn't have adequate tracking, and they were they were not looking at Some of the paperwork that was coming in detail, some of the final reports were late. There were supporting documentations that were inadequate to match the payments that were going out. There was a number of things, and I guess for me, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing some of these which were payouts of $600,000, others of $200,000, one for a truck for $31,000, of which there was no receipt. So, you know, all of this to me shows a lot of evidence of an agency or a corporation of the federal government that is responsible to taxpayers in this country before they give out money and sign off on those kinds of checks are failing to do their jobs appropriately. And I guess my question is, what recommendations are being made to the government to conform with the better standards, better regulations, and more accountability before allowing these kinds of Canadian taxpayers' dollars to be paid out to charitable and business corporations without proper documentation?
In this particular audit, we were concerned with the fact that, you know, we found many cases where there wasn't adequate documentation, so that Treasury Board policies about transfer payment programs were not followed in all cases. In terms of the recommendations that have been made, actually in this particular audit, you know, we have made, I believe it is 12 recommendations, you know, which are all contained at the back of the audit. I could read through all of those for the record if you wanted, but other than that, there are a number of recommendations here that are talking about ways for the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency to, you know, to make sure that they're using good practices, they're complying with Treasury Board policy, and that they are measuring whether what they are doing is having an impact on economic development in the North.
This is where I see the irony here, because one of the other mandates of Canor Agency was to ensure that they would have a base of operations out of Iqaluit, but they would have the majority of their people there. They would be working out of the northern regions, serving northern clients, and so on. Yet they've been able to say that we have not been able to fulfill our mandate to the northern regions because we cannot attract properly qualified people to do the jobs. So therefore, we've had to continue to base positions in Ottawa as opposed to moving them out to the communities where the programs should be applied. But yet, when you made your recommendations to the agency, the responses all came back in terms of them recognizing they had a problem, they agreed with your recommendations, but that they would conduct training and for their program officers to ensure that there was more accountability or proper documentations were being followed. And to me, there's a lot of irony in that. If you can't fill the jobs in the territories because you don't have people trained, but the reason your job is not getting done properly here is because people aren't trained. So I don't know, but the correlation is not jiving for me. I mean, this is obviously, in my opinion, an agency where I'm seeing some major issues and problems surrounding that have not been dealt with, and the excuses that they're providing is not jiving with the reality of what you're reporting in your report.
I think that you know, we did identify that there were, you know, a number of cases related to the 3 transfer payment programs we were looking at where the agency was not complying with Treasury Board policy around transfer payments, not adequately managing, you know, many of the payments they have made, and not tracking information about whether they have had success. And also, you know, despite the fact that the intention was to have the headquarters in Iqaluit, in terms at least of key corporate functions, whether it's the President, Vice President for Policy, Planning, Communications, Senior Advisor for Inuit Community Relations, those positions were still located in Ottawa. So, you know, there are many different areas, and as I said, in this particular audit, we made 12 recommendations that related either to the practices for handling these types of transfer payments or the concerns related to where the staff is located. We made 12 recommendations to the agency.
Thank you. Time has expired. Sorry. Yep, goes quick. Colleagues, we had agreed on an order of the day that either at the end of our normal rotation or at 5:30 we would deal with the issue of Mr. Jaguer's motion. There's a couple of minutes left before 5:30. This would seem to me to be an appropriate time to deal with this. I would hope that we don't need a lot of debate, maybe one or two, so that de facto we don't eat up the time debating whether we should eat up the time. However, I am in your hands, and I look to Mr. Jaguer. You wish to place your motion, sir? And unanimous consent at the beginning would have agreed on a formal motion. A clear majority, 50% plus one, will decide the issue. So there's a motion duly before us. Does anyone feel the need to speak? I see Mr. Woodworth's hand first, and then Mr. Albus.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I wanted to congratulate Mr. Jaguer on his chutzpah for having proposed this motion after, along with his colleagues, wasting close to a half hour in the House, which we could have used in this committee.
Thank you. Over to Mr. Albus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We certainly got a lot of today's discussions. Obviously, we will be able to ask the Auditor General to come back with officials at some point on certain issues yet to be determined. I have been informed by certain members that they do have other commitments, and so we are unable to support at this time. However, we are happy that most members, well, not every member got a chance to speak, but at the same token is that we'll take our lumps, and I appreciate Mr. Woodsworth's comments, but you know, sometimes we all don't get what we want all the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on the motion? No, we're done. Did you want to speak?
Very quickly, Mr. Chair, it's regrettable that the government side is afraid of the questions and answers that could have been asked. But, of course, we're used to that unfortunate habit, and we will follow the will.
For there being no further debate, good. Let's place the motion, make a decision. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate. Thank you. Down. Those opposed. Thank you. Motion is lost. And with that, I will thank Mr. Ferguson and his staff, and again, our appreciation for the work that you do. Your office and yourself are held in such high esteem, and every time you come in here, you reinforce why you deserve that. Thank you so much for being here today. And colleagues, we now stand adjourned.